Okay, so today we're diving into some pretty interesting commentary about the Republican Party, specifically what's going on with them in Congress.
There's been a lot of talk lately.
Yeah, and this YouTube video we found really caught our attention. It's from the Ring of Fire, and the title is pretty bold. Republican admits his party has already collapsed under Trump.
Strong words for sure.
Definitely. So we're going to break down the arguments from the video transcript for everyone listening, see what evidence they're using, and try to get a better grasp of this idea of a collapsed Republican Party.
Sounds good. The transcript features former Republican Congressman David Jolly.
Right, and he's giving his perspective alongside the host of the YouTube channel.
It'll be interesting to see their take on this.
Absolutely. Should we jump right into it?
Let's do it.
Okay, so Jolly makes a pretty striking statement right off the bat. He was on MSNBC talking to Alex Witt, and he basically says that Republicans in Congress don't know what they're doing right now.
So what makes that statement so impactful, you think?
Well, it's the bluntness of it, for sure.
Yeah.
But he doesn't just leave it at that. He backs it up with some really specific examples.
Like what?
Well, he points to two major issues that Congress is grappling with right now: the government funding cliff and the debt ceiling. These are kind of essential functions of Congress: keeping the government running, managing finances.
Pretty basic stuff.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And Jolly's implying that the Republican Party is so dysfunctional right now that they can't even handle these basic tasks.
Oh, I see. So he's not just saying they disagree on policy. He's suggesting a deeper inability to govern.
Right. And it gets even more serious when he starts talking about a constitutional crisis.
Oh, wow. So he's really escalating the concern here. What does he mean by that exactly?
Well, he's basically saying that the way the Republican Party is acting, or rather not acting, is a threat to the balance of power in our government.
The whole system of checks and balances.
Exactly. He thinks Congress has become, and I'm quoting him here, listless and meaningless. So they're not providing the oversight of the executive branch that they're supposed to.
So it's a failure to fulfill their constitutional duty, as he sees it.
Exactly. And it's not just about Trump, even though he obviously sees Trump as part of the problem.
He specifically mentions Elon Musk, too, right?
Yes. He actually compares Musk to a co-president or a first spouse, which I thought was a really interesting analogy.
Yeah, that definitely caught my attention.
Well,
What do you think he's trying to say with that comparison?
Well, for me, it's about power dynamics. He's saying that Musk has this huge influence, but he's not elected, he's not accountable in the same way that someone in government is.
So he's basically suggesting that power is shifting outside the traditional structures, and Congress isn't doing anything to address it.
Right. Now, the YouTube hosts from the Ring of Fire, while they largely agree with Jolly's points, they have a different take on the timeline of this whole collapse thing.
Oh, how so?
They argue that the Republican Party in the House didn't just suddenly collapse under Trump. They say it's been a much longer process.
Interesting. So where do they trace the roots of this problem?
They point to the Tea Party movement as a starting point. Remember that?
Yeah, that was a pretty significant force within the Republican Party.
Right. So the YouTube host is arguing that the seeds of this dysfunction were sown back then, and it's been getting worse over time.
I see. So for them, it's not a sudden collapse. It's more like a slow motion train wreck.
Exactly. And they give some specific historical examples to back up this claim.
What kind of examples?
Well, one of the first things they bring up is the impeachment of Bill Clinton in the 90s.
Ah, yes. That was quite a saga.
Right. And the host calls it the dumbest thing ever. They basically say it was a pointless investigation into personal matters that distracted from real governing.
Interesting take.
Yeah. And then they go on to give a broader overview of Republican behavior in Congress over several administrations.
Okay, what's their assessment there?
Well, they paint a picture of Republicans being pretty compliant during the Reagan and Bush years, basically acting as a rubber stamp for whatever the president wanted. Then, during the Clinton and Obama administrations, they say it was all about obstructionism, just blocking everything.
A pretty stark contrast.
Yeah, and then they point out how during Trump's first term, Republicans were right back to being totally aligned with the president.
So they're painting a picture of inconsistency, not necessarily based on principle, but more on who's in power.
Exactly. And for them, this pattern of behavior is a symptom of deep-seated partisanship. They're saying this has been undermining Congress for decades.
So for them, it's not a recent collapse. It's a long-standing systemic issue.
Right. And to hammer this point home, they bring up the repeated attempts to impeach Democratic presidents.
Oh, right. There were quite a few of those, weren't there?
Yeah, they mentioned that there were over a dozen attempts to impeach Obama, and they also highlight Marjorie Taylor Greene's efforts to impeach Biden from day one.
Yeah, and other Republicans have joined those calls since then.
Exactly. So their point is that this kind of hyper-partisan behavior, including the talk of impeachment, isn't new. It's part of a recurring pattern.
A pattern that, in their view, has been eroding the effectiveness of Congress for a long time.
Right. So even though Jolly and the YouTube host have different views on when this collapse happened, they both agree that something is seriously wrong with the way the Republican-controlled House is functioning right now.
That's a crucial point. Whether it's a sudden collapse or a long, slow decline, the end result is the same. A Congress that's not effectively fulfilling its role.
Exactly. And this should matter to everyone listening because it has huge implications for our whole system of government.
Yeah, that system of checks and balances that we talked about earlier.
Right. If Congress isn't doing its job, if they're not providing oversight and holding the executive branch accountable, then the whole balance of power gets thrown off.
And that can have serious consequences for democracy.
Absolutely. It makes you wonder, if this is a long-term trend, where does it lead? What happens to our system of government if this continues?
Big questions.
So just to quickly summarize what we've covered today, we looked at David Jolly's argument that the Republican Party in Congress has collapsed, and he pointed to current as a real threat to the balance of power in our government.
And then we contrasted that with the YouTube host's perspective. They agree that there's dysfunction, but argue that it's been a long time coming, pointing to examples from the Clinton impeachment to the Tea Party movement and the repeated attempts to impeach Democratic presidents.
And what they both agree on is that this partisan gridlock, this inability to effectively govern, is a serious problem. It raises questions about the future of Congress and its ability to fulfill its constitutional role.
So that leaves us with a final thought for you, the listener. Thinking about all this, do you see the current situation as a sudden crisis or the latest stage in a longer decline? And what do you think it means for the future of our government if this trend continues? We'd love to hear your thoughts. Thanks for joining us for the deep dive. See you next time.